Grammar. Phonology. The inventory of classical Old English surface phones, as usually reconstructed, is as follows. The sounds enclosed in parentheses in the chart above are not considered to be phonemes. The above system is largely similar to that of modern English, except that have generally been lost, while the voiced affricate and fricatives have become independent phonemes, as has ang. The mid-front rounded vowels O stroke had merged into unrounded E before the late West Saxon period. During the 11th century such vowels arose again, as monophthongizations of the diphthongs EO, but quickly merged again with E in most dialects. The exact pronunciation of the West Saxon closed diphthongs, spelt IE, is disputed. It may have been II or IE. Other dialects may have had different systems of diphthongs. For example, Anglian dialects retained IU, which had merged with EO in West Saxon. For more on dialectal differences, see Phonological History of Old English. Sound changes. Some of the principal sound changes occurring in the prehistory and history of Old English were the following. For more details of these processes, see the main article, linked above. For sound changes before and after the Old English period, see Phonological History of English. Grammar. Morphology. Nouns decline for 5 cases: nominative, accusative, genitive, dative, instrumental, 3 genders, masculine, feminine, neuter, and 2 numbers, singular, and plural, and are strong or weak. The instrumental is vestigial and only used with the masculine and neuter singular and often replaced by the dative. Only pronouns and strong adjectives retain separate instrumental forms. There is also sparse early Northumbrian evidence of a 6th case, the locative. Adjectives agree with nouns in case, gender, number, and strong, or weak forms. Pronouns and sometimes participles agree in case, gender, and number. First person and second person personal pronouns occasionally distinguish dual number forms. The definite article se and its inflections serve as a definite article, a demonstrative adjective, and demonstrative pronoun. Other demonstratives are tes and gian. These words inflect for case, gender, number. Adjectives have both strong and weak sets of endings, weak ones being used when a definite or possessive determiner is also present. Verbs conjugate for 3 persons, first, second, and third, 2 numbers, singular, plural, 2 tenses, present, and past, 3 moods, indicative, subjunctive, and imperative, and are strong or weak. Verbs have 2 infinitive forms, bear, and bound, and 2 participles, present, and past. The subjunctive has past and present forms. Finite verbs agree with subjects in person, and number. The future tense, passive voice, and other aspects are formed with compounds. Adpositions are mostly before but often after their object. If the object of an adposition is marked in the dative case, an adposition may conceivably be located anywhere in the sentence. Remnants of the Old English case system in modern English are in the forms of a few pronouns and in the possessive ending s, which derives from the masculine and neuter genitive ending s. The modern English plural ending s derives from the Old English s, but the latter applied only to strong masculine nouns in the nominative and accusative cases. Different plural endings were used in other instances. Old English nouns had grammatical gender, while modern English has only natural gender. Pronoun usage could reflect either natural or grammatical gender when those conflicted, as in the case of if, a neuter noun referring to a female person. In Old English's verbal compound constructions are the beginnings of the compound tenses of modern English. Old English verbs include strong verbs, which form the past tense by altering the root vowel, and weak verbs, which use a suffix such as da, as in modern English, and peculiar to the Germanic languages. The verbs formed 2 great classes, weak and strong. Like today, Old English had fewer strong verbs, and many of these have over time decayed into weak forms. Then, as now, dental suffixes indicated the past tense of the weak verbs, as in work and worked. Syntax. Old English syntax is similar to that of modern English. Some differences are consequences of the greater level of nominal and verbal inflection, allowing freer word order. Orthography. Old English was first written in runes, using the Futhorc, a rune set derived from the Germanic 24-character Elder Futhorc, extended by 5 more runes used to represent Anglo-Saxon vowel sounds, and sometimes by several more additional characters. From around the 8th century, the runic system came to be supplanted by a half-uncial script of the Latin alphabet introduced by Irish Christian missionaries. This was replaced by insular script, a cursive and pointed version of the half-uncial script. This was used until the end of the 12th century when continental Carolingian minuscule replaced the insular. The Latin alphabet of the time still lacked the letters J and W, and there was no V as distinct from U. Moreover, native Old English spellings did not use K, Q or Z. The remaining 20 Latin letters were supplemented by 4 more, A ligature and letter F, which were modified Latin letters, and thorn letter thorn and win, which are borrowings from the Futhorc. A few letter pairs were used as digraphs, representing a single sound. Also used was the Tironian note for the conjunction an. A common scribal abbreviation was a thorn with a stroke, which was used for the pronoun tat. Macrons over vowels were originally used not to mark long vowels, but to indicate stress, or as abbreviations for a following M or N. Modern editions of Old English manuscripts generally introduce some additional conventions. The modern forms of Latin letters are used, including G in place of the insular G, S for long S, and others which may differ considerably from the insular script, notably E, F and R. Macrons are used to indicate long vowels, where usually no distinction was made between long and short vowels in the originals. Additionally, modern editions often distinguish between velar and palatal C and G by placing dots above the palatals, C with dot above, G with dot above. The letter win is usually replaced with W, but A ligature SC, F and thorn are normally retained. In contrast with modern English orthography, that of Old English was reasonably regular, with a mostly predictable correspondence between letters and phonemes. There were not usually any silent letters. In the word knit, for example, both the C and H were pronounced, unlike the K and GH in the modern night. The following table lists the Old English letters and digraphs together with the phonemes they represent, using the same notation as in the phonology section above. Doubled consonants are geminated. The geminate fricatives lettereth, letter thorn, FF and SS cannot be voiced. Old English literature, though more abundant than literature of the continent before AD 1000, is nonetheless scant. The pagan and Christian streams mingle in Old English, one of the richest and most significant bodies of literature preserved among the early Germanic peoples. In his supplementary article to the 1935 posthumous edition of Bright's Anglo-Saxon Reader, Dr. James Hulbert writes, "In such historical conditions, an incalculable amount of the writings of the Anglo-Saxon period perished. What they contained, how important they were for an understanding of literature before the conquest, we have no means of knowing. The scant catalogues of monastic libraries do not help us, and there are no references in extant works to other compositions. How incomplete our materials are can be illustrated by the well-known fact that, with few and relatively unimportant exceptions, all extant Anglo-Saxon poetry is preserved in 4 manuscripts. Some of the most important surviving works of Old English literature are Beowulf, an epic poem, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a record of early English history, the Franks' Casket, an inscribed early whalebone artifact, and Caedmon's Hymn, a Christian religious poem. There are also a number of extant prose works, such as sermons and saints' lives, biblical translations, and translated Latin works of the early Church Fathers, legal documents, such as laws and wills, and practical works on grammar, medicine, and geography. Still, poetry is considered the heart of Old English literature. Nearly all Anglo-Saxon authors are anonymous, with a few exceptions, such as Bede and Caedmon. Caedmon, the earliest English poet we know by name, served as a lay brother in the monastery at Whitby. Beowulf. The first example is taken from the opening lines of the folk epic Beowulf, a poem of some 3,000 lines and the single greatest work of Old English. This passage describes how Hrothgar's legendary ancestor Sild was found as a baby, washed ashore, and adopted by a noble family. The translation is literal and represents the original poetic word order. As such, it is not typical of Old English prose. The modern cognates of original words have been used whenever practical to give a close approximation of the feel of the original poem. The words in brackets are implied in the Old English by noun case, and the bold words in brackets are explanations of words that have slightly different meanings in a modern context. Notice how what is used by the poet where a word like lo or behold would be expected. This usage is similar to what ho, both an expression of surprise and a call to attention. English poetry is based on stress and alliteration. In alliteration, the first consonant in a word alliterates with the same consonant at the beginning of another word, as with Gardena and Girdagum. Vowels alliterate with any other vowel, as with Adalingus and Ellen. In the text below, the letters that alliterate are bolded. A semi-fluent translation in modern English would be: Lo, we have heard of majesty of the spear Danes, of those nation kings in the days of yore, and how those noblemen promoted zeal. Sild Sefing took away mead benches from bands of enemies, from many tribes. He terrified earls. Since he was first found destitute he grew under the heavens, prospered in honors, until each of those who lived around him over the sea had to obey him, give him tribute. That was a good king. The Lord's Prayer. This text of the Lord's Prayer is presented in the standardized West Saxon literary dialect, with added macrons for vowel length, markings for probable palatalized consonants, modern punctuation, and the replacement of the letter N with W. Charter of Cnut. This is a proclamation from King Cnut the Great to his Earl Thorkel the Tall and the English people, written in AD 1020. Unlike the previous two examples, this text is prose rather than poetry. For ease of reading, the passage has been divided into sentences while the pilcrows represent the original division. Dictionaries. Early history. The earliest history of Old English lexicography lies in the Anglo-Saxon period itself, when English-speaking scholars created English glosses on Latin texts. At first these were often marginal or interlinear glosses, but soon came to be gathered into word lists such as the Epinal Erfurt, Leiden and Corpus glossaries. Over time, these word lists were consolidated and alphabetized to create extensive Latin Old English glossaries with some of the character of dictionaries, such as the Cleopatra glossaries, the Harley glossary and the Brussels glossary. In some cases, the material in these glossaries continued to be circulated and updated in Middle English glossaries, such as the Durham Plant Name Glossary and the Laud Herbal Glossary. Old English lexicography was revived in the early modern period, drawing heavily on Anglo-Saxon's own glossaries. The major publication at this time was William Somner's Dictionarium Saxonico-Ladino-Anglicum. The next substantial Old English dictionary was Joseph Bosworth's Anglo-Saxon Dictionary of 1838.